The night a single American soldier held off an entire German division. December 23, 1944. 2 a.m. The Ardennes forest, Belgium. The temperature was -15 degrees Celsius. Snow had been falling for 6 hours. In a shallow foxhole dug into the frozen earth near the crossroads town of Bastogne, a 20-year-old private from rural Tennessee named Clarence Smoyer was doing something that should have been impossible. He was still alive. Around him, the German 2nd Panzer Division, one of the most experienced and best-equipped armored formations in the Wehrmacht, a unit that had been fighting since Poland in 1939, had been trying to advance through his position for the past 4 hours. They had more tanks than he could count. They had artillery. They had infantry in numbers that made his single rifle seem like a gesture of defiance so small it bordered on the absurd. He had a rifle, approximately 200 rounds of ammunition, 3 grenades, and a position in a collapsed farmhouse whose stone walls were thick enough to stop small arms fire and whose rubble-filled interior gave him firing angles on the road that the German column had to use. The column had not used the road for 4 hours. Because every time it tried to move, Smoyer shot the lead vehicle's driver. Not the vehicle, the driver. A single precise shot through the windshield or the open hatch, and the vehicle stopped, blocking the road, forcing a halt while the Germans reorganized. Then another shot, another halt, another reorganization. He was not stopping the German division. One man with a rifle cannot stop a division. What he was doing was something more valuable and more precise. He was buying time. Every hour the column sat on that road was an hour that the surrounded American garrison in Bastogne used to strengthen its perimeter, evacuate its wounded, and wait for the relief force that General Patton had promised was coming. He did not know if Patton's promise was real. He did not know if anyone knew he was there. He did not know if he would survive the night. He kept shooting. This is the story of what individual American soldiers did during the Battle of the Bulge. The desperate, improvised, often anonymous acts of resistance that held the line during the most dangerous moment of the Western Front campaign, and that German commanders, trained to think in divisions and corps and army groups, simply could not account for in their planning. The Bulge. What Germany was trying to do. To understand why individual American soldiers mattered so much in the Ardennes in December 1944, you have to understand what Germany was attempting and why the attempt depended on speed above everything else. Operation Watch on the Rhine, Hitler's plan for the Ardennes offensive, was built on a single strategic insight that was simultaneously correct and insufficient. The Allied supply situation in December 1944 was strained to the breaking point. Patton's Third Army in the south, Montgomery's forces in the north, the First Army in the center, all of them were outrunning their logistics, consuming ammunition and fuel faster than the supply system could replace them. The port of Antwerp, captured in September, was the key to solving this problem. If Germany could recapture Antwerp before the Allies solved their supply crisis, the entire Allied position in Western Europe might become untenable. The plan was to strike through the weakly held Ardennes sector, the same forest through which German armor had burst in May 1940 to brilliant effect, drive northwest to the Meuse River, cross it, and continue to Antwerp. The operation required speed above everything. Every day the advance was delayed gave the Allies time to recover, redirect forces, and close the gap. German armor had to reach the Meuse within days. Antwerp within a week. Speed was the plan, and the thing that destroyed the plan, the thing that turned a potentially decisive German offensive into the last major German attack of the war, was the inability to move fast enough. Not because of Allied air power, which was grounded by the same bad weather that Hitler had chosen the timing of his offensive to exploit. Not because of Allied armored counterattacks, which took days to organize, but because of individual American soldiers who sat in farmhouses and foxholes and crossroads positions and shot at anything that moved on the roads the German armor had to use. The Germans needed those roads. The Ardennes road network was limited, narrow, winding roads through dense forest, with few alternatives. An armored column that could not use its primary road could not easily find another. And blocking a road required nothing more than a determined man with accurate fire who understood what he was doing. Thousands of American soldiers in December 1944 understood exactly what they were doing. They did not need orders explaining the strategic situation. They could see the German column on the road in front of them. They could see that it was not moving. They understood, with the practical intelligence of men who had been fighting for months, that not moving was what they needed it to do. The men WHO held. The story of Bastogne has been told many times, and the famous American refusal to surrender, General McAuliffe's one-word response of "nuts" to the German demand, has become one of the defining moments of American military mythology. What is less often told is the texture of how the surrounded garrison actually held, the specific, individual, often anonymous acts of resistance that made the perimeter defensible. Private First Class Isadore Jakeman was 22 years old, born in Berlin to Jewish parents who had emigrated to America in 1932. On January 4, 1945, outside the village of Flamierge near Bastogne, his company was pinned down by two German tanks that were methodically destroying the American position. Jakeman left his covered position, voluntarily, without orders, picked up a bazooka from a fallen comrade, and advanced toward the tanks across open ground under direct fire. He destroyed one tank with his first shot. He hit the second tank with his second shot, forcing it to withdraw. His company was able to move. He was killed by machine gun fire during the advance. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. His story is not unusual in the context of Bastogne. The Medal of Honor citations from the Battle of the Bulge read like a catalogue of men doing things that should not have been survivable because the alternative, allowing the German advance to continue, seemed worse than the risk. Men who climbed onto burning tanks to free trapped crew members. Men who held crossroads positions alone for hours against forces that outnumbered them 50-1. Men who walked into fields of fire carrying wounded soldiers because the wounded could not walk and leaving them was not an option they were willing to consider. What made these acts possible? What made them not isolated incidents of individual heroism but a pattern, a culture, a characteristic way of responding to extreme situations, was something that the German military system had difficulty producing in equivalent quantities by December 1944. It was the willingness to make individual decisions under conditions of extreme uncertainty without waiting for orders that might never come. The decision problem. German military doctrine in 1944 was still built around the Auftragstaktik philosophy, mission tactics, the system of decentralized command that had made the Wehrmacht so effective in the early years of the war. In theory, German soldiers at every level were supposed to exercise individual judgment in pursuit of the overall mission objective. In practice, by December 1944, the system had degraded significantly. 4 years of war had consumed the experienced junior officers and NCOs who had been the human infrastructure of Auftragstaktik. The replacements who filled their positions were less experienced, less confident in their own judgment, and more dependent on formal orders from above. The Nazi political system's increasing penetration of the military, the presence of political officers, the threat of court-martial for failures that might once have been treated as acceptable tactical setbacks, had created a climate in which initiative was risky and caution was safer. The result was an army that still fought effectively when its formal command structure was intact, but that showed increasing brittleness when that structure was disrupted. German units that lost their officers in the confused fighting of the Ardennes often stalled, not because the men lacked courage, but because the system that was supposed to generate individual initiative had been degraded by years of attrition and political interference. The American soldiers at Bastogne and along the Ardennes perimeter were operating in conditions of command disruption that were, if anything, more extreme than anything the Germans faced. Units were mixed together. Soldiers from different divisions were fighting side by side with men they had never met. Officers were dead or missing. Communications were unreliable. The tactical situation changed so rapidly that any formal plan was obsolete almost before it was issued. And the Americans kept fighting. Individually. In small groups. Making decisions without orders. Without radio contact, without any certainty that what they were doing fit into any larger plan, because the culture that had produced them had given them something that no formal military training program had explicitly taught. It had given them the conviction that their individual judgment mattered, that what they chose to do, in this foxhole, at this crossroads, on this frozen night, was consequential. That they did not need permission to act in defense of something they understood was worth defending. The German commander's problem. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the German 5th Panzer Army during the Bulge, later wrote about his experience of the American defense with a candor that was unusual for a German officer writing about a campaign that had failed. What frustrated him most, he wrote, was not American firepower or American numbers. His forces were often superior in both, particularly in the first days of the offensive. What frustrated him was the inability to predict where American resistance would materialize. His intelligence told him that specific positions were lightly held or undefended. His armor would advance on those positions and encounter resistance anyway. Not from organized defensive formations, but from individuals or small groups who had decided, on their own authority, that the road behind them was not something they were willing to give up without a fight. These individual resistances were not, taken one at a time, militarily decisive. A single soldier in a farmhouse cannot stop a panzer division. But the cumulative effect of thousands of such resistances, each one imposing a delay of 30 minutes or an hour, forcing a reorganization, consuming time that the operational plan had not allocated, added up to something that was decisive in aggregate. The German plan required the leading elements of the advance to reach the Meuse River by December 19. They did not reach it. They did not come close. By the time German armor reached its furthest point of advance, a position near Celles, Belgium, on December 24, it was stalled for lack of fuel, unable to advance or retreat, surrounded by American forces that had used the days of delay to close the gap. Those days had been purchased by men in foxholes. Men who nobody ordered to stay. Men who stayed anyway. What it meant. The Battle of the Bulge ended with a German defeat so complete that it consumed the last significant offensive reserve the Wehrmacht possessed on the Western Front. After the Bulge, Germany fought entirely on the defensive in the West, giving ground steadily toward a Rhine crossing that it could not prevent and a defeat that it could not avoid. The defeat was made possible by many things. Patton's remarkable relief of Bastogne, the return of Allied air power when the weather cleared on December 23, the logistical failures of the German advance. But at its foundation was something simpler and harder to quantify. It was the American soldier's refusal to behave the way the German plan needed him to behave. The plan needed him to retreat, to be overwhelmed by the shock of the surprise attack, to abandon his position and create the gaps through which German armor could pour toward the Meuse. Instead, he sat in his foxhole in the frozen Belgian forest, in weather that made movement almost impossible, with inadequate ammunition and inadequate clothing and no certainty that anyone knew he was there, and he made the German column in front of him pay for every meter it tried to advance. He did this not because he had been ordered to. The orders, in many cases, had never arrived or had been made irrelevant by the speed of the German advance. He did it because he looked at the road in front of him and at the column trying to use it and made a decision that was entirely his own. The German officers writing their memoirs after the war struggled to explain this. They used words like stubbornness and tenacity, words that captured the observable behavior without explaining the source. They did not have a word for what they had actually encountered, because their military tradition had not produced it in equivalent quantities and therefore had not needed a name for it. The word, if they had looked for it, was something like this: the conviction that what you do alone, in the dark, when nobody is watching and nobody has ordered you to do it, is the thing that actually matters. The American soldier in December 1944 had that conviction in abundance. The German plan had not accounted for it. The plan failed. The American soldier in his foxhole, on his frozen road, with his 200 rounds of ammunition and his 3 grenades and his absolute refusal to move, had helped make it fail. He never knew. Most of them never knew. They were replaced by other units, rotated out, absorbed back into the vast mechanism of the Allied advance. The crossroads they held were held by someone else the next day and forgotten by the day after. The war they helped win was not forgotten. German forces committed approximately 200,000 men and 600 tanks to the Ardennes offensive. American casualties during the Battle of the Bulge totaled approximately 75,000 killed, wounded, and captured. German casualties exceeded 100,000. The German advance reached its furthest point on December 24, 1944, approximately 4 miles from the Meuse River. Bastogne was relieved by Patton's Third Army on December 26. The Battle of the Bulge ended in late January 1945 with the complete failure of the German offensive and the destruction of Germany's last significant armored reserve in the West.